How are you?
Pretty good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Have you had a nice, very warm couple of days?
Oh gosh, yeah, it has been warm, humid. I've done some hiking even still
Really?
at the cooler time. Yeah. Yeah, we've, even though I'm a member now of Mountain True, but we have this, last year it was a hike-a-thon, this year it's a Mountain True. So it's paddling, biking, hiking, whatever.
You gotta
So
get
I'm
your
committed
miles
to
in.
50 miles and try to hit the pledge.
What are you at
I'm at 38. I'll easily make it by August 31st.
now? No, he'll be, well, congratulations, you're living, but, not all for
If only.
That was correct.
There's
If
the
only.
first line business, but something else.
Somebody was doing your car first. I do.
So that's my,
Oh, you guys.
now bigger ones are starting, the ones that also have that.
We're pretty good at maximum.
They're, they
And I was like,
lot more.
you're taking
That's
that
all
place.
they were money.
Usually.
Or don't, that's quite enough to go.
Right.
That's probably our.
Hey, y'all, this is Bob Turner here. Your mic is muted, so I don't know if you started the meeting yet or not, but just so you're aware, your mic is muted. There you go.
Right.
I got
Okay,
you.
I believe, thank you, we appreciate it. I believe we do have everyone here now who is planning to attend. Kevin is not going to make it, so Matt, as the vice chair, are you comfortable chairing the meeting today?
Sure.
Okay, great. So the first, I'll share the agenda, but the first line of business is to do the roll call. If you'd like to start us off.
This is Matt Fusco, Vice Chair, present.
Bob, do you want
Want to send around the group?
yeah, we can do everybody online first, I think, and then we'll do.
Hey, this is Bob Turner here online.
Lena Richards.
Allie, I think you're the last person. Allie? I'm Jill Carter. I'm the open space bond manager and the secretary for the committee.
All right, hi, I'm here.
Thanks, Allie.
I'm not part of the roll call, but what do we just now?
There. We usually just say who the
Oh.
staff is here.
Michael Fruit here, Buncombe County.
Allison Baines, Buncombe County Parks and Recreation.
Thomas Gold, Buncombe County Parks and Recreation.
Bob Gale, Land Conservation Advisory Board.
And Babcock. All right. The next item on the agenda, Matt, is the approval of the August 2023 agenda.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda as written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, and then the next item, Matt, is the approval of the July 2023 meeting minutes.
Is there any comments or questions or changes about the minutes from last month?
No.
Would anybody like to make a motion to approve?
I'll make it.
Second.
Sounds like it approved. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And then the next meeting agenda item, oh, sorry, Bob? Did you have a question? No. Is Michael Frew is the senior staff attorney for the county. And in our last meeting, we did have a conversation about what are some of the contract options for projects to kind of protect the county and the intention of the bond and make sure these bond funds are being used for their intended purposes. And so I asked Michael Frew to join us today to talk a little bit about those options and answer any questions you all might have about what we can do on the legal side to kind of enforce potential passive recreation.
All right. Hi, everybody. Michael Frew. I talked with Jill this morning just to get an idea of what the board might be looking for in terms of these options. And it just reminded me, because Jill said, what if we're working with the town of Black Mountain and the town says, okay, here's a few acres, we're going to use it as a park. So what happens if the town changes its mind in 10 years? What we do? So that reminded me of when I was brand new to the county, and I started as an assistant county attorney. It was about 2003, and for reasons unknown, the county offered for sale to PAC or to anyone who wants to bid it. The county somehow accepted a bid from PAC, the owners of PAC's Tavern, for about a 100-foot by 100-foot parcel of property. I think it's where that outdoor seating area is now over there. So the bid came in, and suddenly I learned that the upset bid period was progressive. And I go, what the hell are we doing? Sorry. But, so why are we selling county property in the park? So anyway, the sale went through. Everybody was up in arms. The city sued the county, other various citizens sued the county. It went up to the Court of Appeals, and the court ruled that because there was no restriction on the property that would bind the county was able to use the provisions of Chapter 168 to convey the property to the last and highest bidder. That property out there, a lot of it, it's called Pack Square, it was 1900. George Pack donated a good bit of property to the city and or county to use as a park. But that's all it said. It didn't say it had to be used in perpetuity for a park, so it had no binding restriction on the deed. So any county property, any city property would be subject to sale if if the board or council decided that the property was surplus, not needed for city or county purposes anymore, and put it out for sale to the last and highest bidder. So yes, the town could donate its property to that use if we put a restriction on the deed. So we pay the town $1, $10,000, $1 million. It doesn't really matter. As long as there's consideration for give and take between the parties, the town could say, okay, we donate to the county passive recreation land subcommittee, or however we're going to structure that, to hold the development rights for the property in perpetuity. And the town would be allowed to use it for regular town purposes in certain situations if they retain title that did not burden the easement. So there'd be like 3 different ways. I mean, the county could flat out buy the couple of acres. That'd be one way, probably the most expensive way. You could get an easement to use a portion or all of it for those passive recreation purposes, or that third option to do covenants or restrictions on the property, record that. Any way you do it, it's in the registered deeds office as public record, and that's how you restrict it. So this is the first time the county has done these types of bonds, so I imagine we would structure any restrictions for an easement or just restrictions as to use and model it after a conservation easement, at least as far as in rights to investigate, to make sure that nothing is being done contrary to restrictions. So typically, like it could be Conservative Carolina, Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, we could hire Allison so she could quit this job and just become a passive rec umpire. And once a year, whomever that party who holds the easement or the rights of investigation would give reasonable notice to any of these properties that's the passive recreation, go there and eyeball it, take a couple pictures. As long as nothing is going awry, you're good to go. Any questions so far? No. So the other part of that is, Jill let me know that, so what if Allison goes out there next year and they've started to construct a road, a parking pad, or some kind of a lean-to or a whole house. So what do? First, you just send them a cease and desist letter. You can't do that. Here's the reason why. Here's the document you or your predecessor signed to put it's a legal burden on the property that says you cannot do these developments on the property at all. And if they ignored it, we go over to district or superior court, probably superior court since this involves real property, and get them to do a favor. Say, guys, you can't do that. You're gonna have to tear that down, undo it, return it to its condition. And we'd also include in our easement documents or conservation documents that if we have to go to court, you're gonna pay for it. I mean, those are the two main things that are in my mind that we need to make sure on our checklist to say we gotta have enforcement right, enforcement mechanism, and make it their problem to pay for that enforcement right and a payment to the land. So that's both the simple and the complex version, because it's really not that hard. I mean, I think the biggest step is how do we, why we hired Jill to figure out the best way to leverage the bond money, let it go as far as it can, and just make the decision. There's going to be some instances where people would be happy to donate it, but we would still put in the whatever it was, if it was a deed or an easement or just restriction, we put $1 and other valuable consideration. We just want to always show that there's a consideration, that you're trading something, some good for some other good. And what they're trading is, or giving up, is their development rights in the property. Either all of them or just a portion of them, and that just all depends on the negotiation. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question. If the staff or whoever proposes something like that to be protected, and this board, this advisory board subcommittee approves it, and it goes on up, when it's starting to happen, would there need to be a public review of that, or would the public opportunity at this meeting, or I don't know, Land Conservation Advisory Board, or anywhere else along the way, would that be the public suffice for the public comment? Do you know what the process would be?
Either fully
I
developed.
mean, before they actually close the deal, is there? I'm asking out of total.
Yeah, well, we haven't fully developed the process.
I see.
And just to answer your question, so you know where I'm coming from, the statutes are set up such that disposing of property is more difficult and open to transparency purposes. Public hearing before the commissioners, notice in the newspaper, all those bells and whistles to make sure everybody knows what the county or city are intending to get rid of and why and for how much. It's a lot easier the other way in terms of that transparency because it's not required. It just has to be within the budget ordinance or some budget amendment to show here's our money. So that cash aspect would of course be public. Finance records are always public record. That's always an open book. It just depends on how you get into it. But I imagine part of the process would be that here's where we intend to put some passive recreational. Here's the area we're intending to acquire some property through whatever means. And I'm sure that will be an open process.
And to add to that, we'll talk about this a little bit more when we go over how the criteria has been refined. But one of the things that we are asking for, giving favor to, is projects that have that community engagement and community input in the design of the project. And so in the instance of like an acquisition of land for a future park development, people could show that there's like letters of support from the surrounding community, that they want to see a park put here, or the support of the landowner themselves if it's not the landowner that's applying for this. So that community engagement is something that's going to be a key criteria, but also on our end, I know as we said, we haven't designed exactly what it will look like, but we've talked to the staff that when we get to kind of the project evaluation phase, we want to make sure we're going out to the community and saying, you know, these are the types of projects we're seeing. What do you want to see in your community? Working within the boundaries that we have of passive recreation. Because obviously, there's a definition, and we can't really go outside of that definition. But I do think, while there's not as many requirements around that public engagement and acquisition, it's something we want to honor and make sure we're doing.
Okay, thanks.
Michael, this is Matt Fusco. I have a question. As far as, I guess, what mechanisms, or are there mechanisms in place? It would be similar to, say, an endowment for a conservation easement where there is a certain amount of money set aside for that land trust to be able to monitor the easement from year to year. Is there a mechanism, or has there been discussion of something to say that, like, okay, we've approved this site for, let's call it hiking trails and pollinator gardens, X, Y, and Z, and there's a management plan that's been developed and we expect it to cost this much per year. Is there going to be, or is this something this group should think about as to how that gets funded moving forward? I think that's been a question that's come up in our meetings previously. You know, this is a great idea. It's going to be an awesome park, but how the heck are we going to pay for it over the next 50 years?
Yeah, I got you. I think that's more baked into the process for conservation easements. And again, Buncombe County is brand new to this open space world, and we have 3 different pots of open space, and some of it will be easements to conserve property, conserve view shed, and obviously part of it would be for the passive recreation aspect. That's not fully baked either.
But it'll probably depend. It would be like a contract to contract basis, I would think. So in the instance that there's a project that this subcommittee wants to move forward, that's a land acquisition, and we want to have those monitoring elements in it, we would probably model that contract after what we see in some of the conservation easements that we do as a county. I think where it gets a little more interesting, and we don't have as defined of a path forward, is those like park projects where there's already programming, because we don't have as much of a model yet to work off of that. But I think that's going to be a project for our staff to look at, you know, what are our options and how can we build those endowment type mechanisms into those projects.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the point being there is that, you know, great new park, but the county hasn't changed their budget to accommodate it. And I guess that happens at staff and during budgeting versus built into the bond program.
Well, I mean, Allison here is right on hand. I mean, we've had talks about having new county parks. That could well be construed as being part of the passive recreation portfolio. And the first thing Allison has said more than once is we'll need staff for this. Right. So if it's a staffed county park, I mean, that kind of concern is built in.
Okay.
And that wouldn't be a concern. It's third-party owners, whether it's just restricted land or easement land, those are the ones we would need to consider what you're proposing. How that would be paid for, I don't know. I don't know that it'd be an endowment so much as it just be something that had to be budgeted.
In the cases of like land trusts on the Land Conservation Advisory Board, when they apply for funding for transaction costs, they have to go through this whole thing, and one of the questions is, do you have the ability to, I guess, I can't remember, maintain or whatever the future, and these groups, they're used to this, and they do have the money. They wouldn't apply for it if they didn't.
Right.
So that always works itself out that way. So I guess what Matt's talking about is the ones where maybe the county itself was going to hold the easement or something. And like you said, that's probably just annual budget of operating costs, what you ask for in your budget. Hopefully it gets approved.
I think so. If it's a 2 mile trail, you're gonna have to budget to maintain it. You're gonna have to staff that. And you have your investigation every day during that process. So I think that's built in.
Well, and one of the things as well that we'll see in the criteria, but one of the things in the criteria is that long-term management and maintenance plan that we've talked about. And so even county-owned projects that are going for the bond funds, when they're evaluated, we'll need to see like what the plan is for the management and maintenance, even on county projects. Definitely for third-party projects, but we're evaluating all projects against the same criteria. That they all will be, needing to demonstrate that they have some plan in place for that long-term monitoring, maintenance, management, etc.
Back end because it's still showing up on that issue.
I have a question in terms of, so you mentioned the three options of purchasing outright, easement, and then a deed restriction of some sort. Can you speak to in terms of the final two, like the permanence of either of them? Can they be undone?
No. I mean, Allison has 10 acres and we need 1 acre. So you buy it or burden it with an easement or restrictions. Now, it's not even worth talking about. The difference is really between the easement and the restriction because you're doing the same purpose, right? But it's a deed. I can transfer property with a general warranty deed and buy your property, buy your house. I can use a general warranty deed, say this is an easement, and this is what it does. You record it, it's permanent, it's paid for. So that's why you want to have it of record recorded in the Register of Deeds office. So it's permanent.
Michael, I've dealt with a lot of conservation easements, and then many of them, they will sometimes make changes with the land trust. I guess in the case of a county property or something that's with the county, I don't know how that might work, but I have seen where terms of easements have changed with approval from the land trust. I wouldn't think that in the county's best interest that they would want to do that, but I'm not sure exactly how that happens, but I have seen it happen.
Well, I mean, I think the intent of all those documents is to conserve the land. And, we're involved in, it's a DOT transaction out on Lester Highway, but there was a soil and water easement on a piece of property out there. The DOT condemned it with a quick take. Quick take is that, boom, we've recorded a thing, deposited our money over in their clerk of superior court's office. When they file and pay that money, that property is now state property. The problem is, I don't know if they thought ahead to see that this is in a conservation easement. So we're going to end up before a judge either to approve a change in the conservation easement documents and probably end up finding substitute property, 5 acres over there that's comparable to the 5 acres here. Just sort of swap that purpose maybe on the other side of the road, or have to reinvent the wheel for 10 acres up in Barnersville. Does that still fulfill the purposes and intents of the original conservation easement? That might be something the judges say, okay, that's close enough. So, I mean, if there's general day in and day out changes in documents, transfer, I mean, I think that we'll have it set up such that any grantor of an easement or grantor of restrictions to burden their land, I mean, you're going to allow for assignment of those rights to a new purchaser, leaving it to your children or grandchildren. And there has to be some mechanism through approval of the parties involved and or a superior court judge to say, we need to do this to preserve the purposes and intents of this easement area. So yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, that may happen, and we'll probably just have to expect it will happen sometime in the future and try to build that into the documents.
Yeah.
And, once we get to drafting those, I'm going to rely heavily on documents we've used before for Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, Conserve Carolina, and the soil and water easements that we've used and put in place. And even those, like I said, DOT comes through, that's a whole different ballgame.
And it does work the other way sometimes too. I remember there was been a couple of controversies over the years on when the city was trying to develop revenue and they were looking at logging the Asheville watershed. And that became a big issue. And they didn't do it because of the bids that got turned in were way too high and they couldn't do it. But that led to talking with the Conservation Trust of North Carolina and the city of Asheville to easement holders. You couldn't log above a certain elevation, but they were going to log below it. And they rewrote the wording to not allow logging in the Asheville watershed. Unless it's ecological purposes or hazard or something. But so they actually strengthened that. It was an early land trust agreement. It had a lot of weaknesses in it. But they improved that.
I got you. Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Bob Turner. I have one question related to this part of the conversation. So obviously the money goes a lot further if we get the landowners to donate the land outright. If we're looking at just purchasing land, 10 million doesn't really go that far for that many purchases. So what comes to mind to me is we're looking for people to either donate development rights or put restrictions on the property. Is from my experience with Bob on the LCAB board, we never, this doesn't come into play, but now we've got a landowner who's willing to do that, to discount the land or whatever part of this program. But now we've got the public involved in, part of that, he's got to allow access for he may still be the owner, but he's got to allow public access to it. And so public comments and all that may go against what he really wants to approve as a use for his land. It seems like, we've got a lot more discussion with the landowner in those kind of situations on what he's given up and would he want to continue ownership of that land with the liability that may come from it with people on his land. So those are some issues that are different than what I'm used to working with LCAB on.
We won't really know until those come up. And I know the land trust, some of them have worked for years, slowly developing an agreement with the landowners before it finally happened. Yeah, you're right with the public sort of a thing. It creates some other nuances there, but or issues possibly. But if it works, it's great, and then we'll move forward and do what we can do. I guess.
I've been in more than one discussion in the last few years about people's concern, or if you conserve that property and you're not there every day, are you just making a new homeless camp? So that's a genuine concern. But if it's an easement for a greenway through an area, I've heard a lot of people say, well, we will donate or sell you these development rights in that area, but you're also going to have to put up a fence. There's all kinds of ways to deal with it.
And what are the advantages for a landowner to keep ownership of the land in this kind of situation? Really, when he's given up the rights and the access, is there any benefit to continuing to hold the land?
Well, that's when appraisers do conservation easements. You have a 50 acres. You have 2 buildings and an outbuilding, and the highest and the best use. When you use the terms of the trade and lingo, if in a perfect world for a developer, they could put 10 units over here in this other corner, this nice flat area. So that's what the appraisal would be for. Your property is worth $1 million as is, but if you developed it, you could get 5 million because, put in those 12 units or having their units. So you'd be looking to buy or somehow acquire $4 million worth of rights. So, yes, I think there's going to be situations where we're going to have to get the current appraised value. What is the appraised value of full development within the zoning for the property? And so that's what you're bargaining for, is for those, you're giving up that development right.
And that would be, a landowner could write off up to a certain percentage of their income for up to 15 years after the easement is placed based on the value that's given up. Generally, these days appraisers are looking at a land for development value and not I could sell each lot for $1 million and therefore I have 5, 10, $15 million. That's been tagged by the IRS and had been flagged and also had easements turned around because of that type of appraisal. So the benefit to a landowner to hold on to it would be that they would see a reduced tax burden, not only in the value of the land once its easement's placed, but also potentially in the value they're giving up. And so obviously in some cases, it might benefit a landowner who's got a high income.
That's right, I agree.
Bob brought up liability. If a landowner donates an easement and keeps the ownership, where does the liability lie for anybody that comes on the property and gets interest?
Well, you start by thinking, I mean, any landowner, personally at my house or county property here, I mean, you'd be responsible for open and obvious dangers, something that you had reasonable notice of. So my analysis of questions like that always comes down to, the reasonable person standard. Someone walking on your property is assumed to be able to negotiate it, see where they're going, and be careful. If they're not those things, then it's contributory negligence and they can sue everybody. But if you're just one fraction at fault yourself, then that plaintiff doesn't get anything. So it's not really measured that way. And there's no way to make anybody happy when you start talking about that, because there's really not a good answer.
Yeah, I just don't want to see that as possibly a burden to somebody who, or barricade to donating.
Well, I mean,
if they think they could be liable.
The flip side is if you have enough acres and you're just living there in your own plot, I mean, the homeless camp where the people can walk through there anyway, you haven't really changed your risk. Is it changed your risk because more people are invited? Maybe, but I don't think so. I don't see it that way, because it's still the responsibility of people to take care of themselves, even in this day and age.
Would that also be something that like potentially get ironed out in the contract though?
Well, there's no way in the world we're going to say that if you get sued, we'll take care of it. So
that would be true even if, say, somebody donated an easement, but the county is maintaining it as a park.
But I think the county's obligation would be simply to maintain it in good working order as a park. If Allison goes out and sees a tree that looks to be sick or dying, I think we should go cut it down. As long as we're doing the stuff that we reasonably expect to do, I think we're covered. But yet, to have to allay that concern of landowners, there's a good way to do it.
Probably the landowners that are going to donate something for this passive recreation probably, I mean, naturally want to protect it for some reason, either for the public, for not having it be developed, or for future kids being able to see this kind of land. They probably take that kind of stuff into consideration, I would imagine, and say, well, that's a risk, but I believe in this so much. This is why I'm putting the land out there. So we're probably not going to see something that the landowner is in favor of doing this.
Oh, it won't.
It'll never make it up here.
No, I wouldn't foresee any kind of condemnation actions in the domain happening to passive recreation. Right. And that's the difference between, remember, 10 pretty acres up on the mountainside. I mean, you've inherited it, you're you're rich, you bought it, and you want to put it in conservation easement. But when you do that, you're just limiting your development rights. You don't have to invite the public on that kind of property. These kind of things that people are going to be invited to it. So greenway or a park, maybe there's less inclination to keep an ownership interest just for those reasons. I mean, I think that'd be reasonable.
Any other questions on the contract mechanism piece? Will we still have through with us?
And just, you mentioned contracts, so that just triggers one other thought. I mean, if this is going to be a years-long process, project, and we might identify property here and there over the course of time, just to put in a contract to say, here's our intent. We don't know when we close. We settle on the price, but what we do is we settle on a price, we get an appraisal or some mechanism to establish that price. And to jump ahead of things, once we have that, we would always include a provision subject to approval of the County Board of Commissioners. So that way we could buy time and wait to close and acquire some of the properties. And you might have to pay something to be able to keep that contract in place for a period of time.
Does that contract become immediately public record?
Sure. The only thing that we could keep confidential, and this board would be included in that, since it's an advisory board of the Board of Commissioners, would be the price and other material terms to be negotiated. So once you get past that threshold, you have a price, you have material terms, it's public record. If you were the proposed donator, your name, Allison Danes, would be public right off the bat. Even though that is sort of counterintuitive, because once we know it's your property, the bidding war starts and everybody's chasing you to pay more money for that thing. But that's why you try to strike while the fire's hot.
Is that something that we mentioned how, let's say we want to buy that time, like saying this is all subject to commissioner approval. But we would probably have to pay some sort of transaction costs in order to keep that option.
Well, you're paying for the option period. Right. You're paying for that time. So for this 3-year period, I promise not to offer this property to anybody else.
So we can use the bond funds for that buying of the option.
Yeah, we've talked about that, and I've talked about it with bond counsel just to double check my read of the statute. But if we're looking at a piece of property, we're doing our due diligence to see if this is going to work for our passive recreational purposes, and it doesn't pan out. Well, still, that's a valid expense of bond funds, and you don't get in the game unless you do your due diligence and try to make it work. Sometimes it's not going to work. But that's okay. It's unfortunate, but it's okay.
Thank you very much
Sure.
for joining.
Sure.
You are welcome to stay or you can.
Let me hear you.
Thank you very much.
What happens with the passive refined evaluation criteria?
Awesome. Well, on that note, so the next item on the agenda is the refined criteria. We have been wrapping up our public engagement period, and or once again, is the PowerPoint visible?
So it's showing on the live stream. I'm not sure if it's showing on the Zoom participants.
Can those of you on Zoom see the PowerPoint right now?
No, we still see the agenda.
Okay.
Now something's coming up though. Something's coming. The Zoom.
Let's try this.
There's often a lag in this room with this display or something.
There we go. We've got it now.
Okay, perfect. All right. So as I was saying, we've been wrapping up our public engagement period phase for this criteria. We had that event at Richmond Hill Park last week and had some great people come out to learn about passive recreation and also talk about their thoughts around passive recreation. And we've also been kind of getting more survey responses, and based on that, I have further refined the criteria. So in the last month's meeting, I kind of walked through that detailed report of the survey results. I did not do that for this presentation because I didn't want to be repetitive, but I am also happy to share that with you again if you would like to see it. But some of the new or additional input that we've received since last month's meeting are first, there's continued prioritization of conserving the land for future park development as the number one choice, but the interest in using bond funds for programming or for putting, trails on parks already open to the public, that interest has grown since the last assessment. Additionally, you may remember on our survey, we asked the kinds of activities people wanted to be able to engage in on passive recreation lands, and biking has gone up considerably in the ranks. Number one is still hiking, and number two is still gathering places, but biking has made its way up to third now. And then one element that has come out a lot in the conversations around safety and also around conservation is pushing for more signage. So a lot of the survey results were around wanting signs around what types of trails are used for what purposes and how you should engage on those trails. But also there's been a lot of discussion around wanting to see educational opportunities on these lands. So either educational signage about the native species or other educational programming opportunities. And then finally, another safety concern that's come out a lot, which is not surprising given bear accounts lately, but there's a lot of concern around interaction between users of these lands and the wildlife, both in terms of their impact on the conservation and the habitat, but also in terms of safety. And so wanting to make sure that there's elements in place to mitigate that. So based on the input we received initially, as well as what we've gotten in the last month, again, I've refined the criteria, and we have a set of qualifying criteria and a set of weighted criteria. Those of you on the Recreation Advisory Board, that sounds familiar because we did a similar thing with the greenways component of the bond. For passive recreation, the first two are really just based on the restrictions of the bond itself. The project needs to be able to be completed within the timeline restrictions of the bond. So as you know, we have 7 years to allocate these funds, with the option to potentially extend to 10 years. So we need to make sure that these projects can be ready to receive those funds within that timeline. And then the second is geographic location. They need to be located within Welcome County. And then the third qualifying criteria that we've discussed previously is requiring this plan for the long-term maintenance and management of the property. Which again, we talked about that earlier today, but we've also talked about that at previous meetings. We want to make sure that these lands are clean and safe and usable in the long term and not just going to fall aside after we find them. And next, we have the weighted criteria. So these are scored on a scale. So projects will receive higher number of points based on how well they perform against these criteria. The weights for each of these criteria was based on the survey, public input we received in that survey, as well as just our public engagement phase that we've had. As you may remember, conservation and environmental impact really came out very strongly on top as like the public's #1 priority for these lands. And so that is rated the highest at 20%. Next is accessibility at 18%, feasibility at 17%, equity at 15, long-term management and maintenance at 10, costs and leverage funding at 10, alignment with county plans, needs, and other priorities at 5%, and safety at 5%. And I will go through both those. So conservation, environmental impact, some of the things that we would be looking at in assigning those scores for that criteria are both wanting to, again, minimize the negative impact, but maximize the positive. So making sure that, if they're putting in trails, that they're using low impact materials and techniques, that they're having kind of minimum damage or impact on the habitats and native species on that land. They're managing things like stormwater and runoff if it's a park or trail system. And then some of the kind of positive environmental impacts are things like tree canopy preservation and restoration. That's something we heard a lot in the survey, was interest in tree canopies. Kind of contiguous conserved lands, or like kind of contribution to wildlife corridors is one thing to consider. The area of land concern or conserved. Ecosystem and biodiversity contributions, protection and restoration of aquatic resources, and then that educational opportunities. How can we engage the community on conserving wildlife and safely and positively engaging in nature? And accessibility, this obviously the first one that comes to mind is ADA accessibility. We did hear this a lot, both in the survey and in kind of public engagement opportunities, but as well as ADA, like accessibility for seniors and different able bodies. Also accessibility in terms of how people can get to these lands, so proximity to public transportation and to population hubs for downtown areas, the walkability and bikeability to get to these places, parking availability, and also connectivity to kind of other trail systems and greenways falls under this. For feasibility, this is a pretty big one, both in the public input and in just, we want to make sure we're getting projects done. So again, having that community support and stakeholder support demonstrated. If there's a feasibility study completed, we want to, if there's one completed, that's a great thing, but also, how old is it? Is it complete? Different geographic features that might impact the plans for this land, whether it be topography or hydrology. The status of the project itself. So if they already have the land ownership concerns accounted for, they've started on implementation and they're applying for bond funds to help them get to the next level, those types of questions around feasibility. Additionally, and need for additional structures or like big improvements on the land. And then finally, the estimated time for completion. Equity, this one, that's pretty interesting. Equity came out pretty high in this survey. So it's exciting to see that. Jennifer, I see your hand is raised. Do you have a question?
Excuse me. I do. So on the last one before feasibility and on feasibility, accessibility, parking, and then as we go on to the next one where we say about design, some of these things I don't know how we are going to rate in an application from the standpoint of maybe it only needs 10 parking spaces or maybe it needs 50 parking spaces. So how in this early on when we're developing this criteria, as we list things, are we feeling confident that we're going to know the answer in order to use that as something that we rate? And in the feasibility, we've talked about the priority being obtaining land and programming it later. So when we talk about that, we don't have this expectation of design. So I'm just wondering if we're closing ourselves in here with expectations that we're not following through in other ways that we're talking about things. So
So I'd say, and please, anyone has thoughts on that question, contribute. I'd say from the second half of that, around the acquisition versus improvements, you know, we are still considering both types of projects in this component of the bond. And so for those projects that do have improvements or like program sites, I think we need to consider those things. And then there's other elements within these criteria that would be more applicable to those and might not be applicable to a land acquisition. But that's why these are the things we'll look at, but they're not requirements, is the way I was thinking about it. But I'm curious what other thoughts people have on that. If we need to have two completely separate tracks for those two project types, I guess.
And I'm mostly thinking about like taking this the next step down the road, which is scoring it. And so how do we equitably score applications based on this that are very different?
To that point, what part does current development play on a piece? Like if there's already established recreational amenities that fit the litmus test of passive recreation, so a piece of property that already has trails on it that are appropriate trails, accessible types of things, or even if they have like an initial contact station that's accessible in a parking lot, for example. So
I would see us at this level being pretty high level in terms of, you know, let's say that somebody came and said, we've got this piece of property that is 40% average slope, and we want to do a bike park, and we want to do this, and we want to do that, and we've got parking for 250 cars. When we see something like that at this level, and we see a property that's a very steep slope, that's probably going to have some dings against it as far as our criteria goes. But one, you know, I don't see these projects as actually having a construction set of documents ready to go when we are evaluating them. You know, if it gets approved and they move forward, then they would presumably still have to go through a county planning process, which might not have specific numbers for trailheads and things like that, but there is some element of standards that have to be met in order to, you know, service certain things. And I may be wrong there, but it seems like at our level, we'd be so high up that we wouldn't be able to comment on, do you have 5 parking spaces or 25? But we could say that does not seem appropriate for this site because you're proposing a Walmart parking lot on, say, a Chestnut Mountain, which is the Canton Trail system that was recently developed. But that's just my thought.
Yeah, I agree with Matt on that. That makes sense. And we wouldn't at this level be getting into those weeds of design, I wouldn't think. But I think whoever it is, when it gets to that point, or even maybe at this point, if there's, like, for instance, a piece of property that's kind of pristine, I mean, very nice, you know, not a lot of development, not Walmart parking lots near it or anything like that, but out from things, and trail is on it, and it's been, we've seen this time and time again where at first maybe it doesn't get used a lot, people don't know about it, but once they start learning about it, then there's a lot of people start using it. So I think in those situations you can kind of estimate, you know, we better plan for more than 10 parking spaces because within 2 years, this may have a flock of people there. So I don't know where I'm going with that, except that you can't exactly figure it out, but maybe you can plan a little bit ahead, depending on the site.
And I could interject too. Hopefully we'll be working with some land trust organizations and some land conservation group that will come to us in the process, in the application process, and address some of these issues. You know, there's space for 50 cars here, and answer some of these questions when they apply. So have some idea.
I think you're correct. However, I also think that we may just be getting land suggested with no programming done whatsoever. And we are saying that we're interested in just acquisition as well. And so as we're developing criteria, I just think we want to think through the fact that this criteria may only fit portion of the types of applications that we get in terms of scoring it.
So I guess my question then for this subcommittee would be, as a staff, we've previously talked about it, as we can have these high-level criteria. We have 2 tracks in terms of the types of projects that can apply. There's the land acquisition projects, and then there's these like parks with improvements on them. We would use the same high-level criteria, but we would ultimately there'd be like different applications because there's different details you need based on those types of projects. But what I'm hearing is it might not be appropriate to use the same criteria for those 2 separate types of projects. And you might need 2 sets of criteria. But is that something everyone agrees? Are there different viewpoints?
I think you could still have one set of criteria, but depending on what the purpose of the land use might be, there may be a need to have a conceptual plan associated with it so that we have an understanding of what the intent is. If it's just a land acquisition that's going to sit and not be developed, that's one thing. But if it's going to be developed, having even just a high level concept that kind of demonstrates the desire, which I think would probably also be beneficial to the county, because you don't want somebody to come in with a program that you don't know about or don't know what it's going to be. And then the county gets saddled with trying to maintain and manage something that wasn't in there. So you would certainly at some point have to have a concept. So I kind of think it wouldn't be 2 separate criteria, but it might be additional information that the applicant needs to provide that demonstrates that whichever route they're taking is adequate or adequately thought through, I should say, or at least to a point where we can feel comfortable about making a recommendation to commission to move forward or not on a project.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can imagine something that this is going to be done for this reason. If A, it'll just be this, but if B, provide your plan for and steps under that kind of thing. It's like medical things you fill out. Have you ever had this problem in your family history? If so, explain it, that kind of thing.
The question that I have is being at the Richmond Hill community outreach, there was some interest in organized parties such as neighborhood associations. There may be interest in municipalities, local municipalities for furthering passive recreation lands and looking to leverage these funds to either expand a park that currently exists or develop a park perhaps in their area, if it's a municipality where they already have land, but they do not have the funds to develop that land for a passive park. And so my question is, does this set of criteria, do we feel like that single track will address that type of a request for passive recreation lands? And again, it could be municipalities, it could also be neighborhood associations. I mean, there's a lot of very active types of groups such as that in neighborhoods that they do own land in these neighborhoods, and there may be an interest in some type of a play for that connectivity into a larger set of trails potentially, or connectivity to certain areas. Because right now we're just
I think
talking
that's
about
a great idea. I mean, it takes the burden off of having to buy and develop if there's an opportunity for that. And it seems like having the, that path of where there's a little more information in terms of a concept would help that. But I would certainly advocate for, say, a Canton who's got the land that doesn't have the resources to be able to implement a park. If that's an opportunity for us to be able to support them, I think that helps, at least fine tune some of where the money's going and not just to land and development. I think, not sure how we get there, but it seems like that concept thing. I don't want to make it too burdensome for us to have more than, or too many tracks that we have to follow as far as a group. Especially since we're basically, as I understand it, making recommendations to the commissioners as opposed to actually approving the development itself.
I'd like to speak to that too, is that if you have that one set of criteria, then the subcommittee will be looking at the highest and best use. And it seems to me that that same criteria would apply for anything, and we would decide, or hopefully, if this is part of what the bond purpose was, and and elevate it that way, rather than saying different criteria. It just seems like that makes it too confusing.
Yeah. I think that was kind of the way I had been envisioning it too. There's different application requirements. Obviously, if there's a project that has a design element to it, but ultimately, like this subcommittee would be responsible for recommending the best possible projects, whether they're acquisitions or they're parks with improvements in designs that are incorporated. And that's your role. It's bringing those best projects, and we're determining those best projects based on this high level set of criteria, and the details come out in those applications of, oh, we want to put this bike park here. So, okay, talk to us about the design, what's incorporated in that design. That was my envision. Okay, well, I can keep going through the criteria for now, but I think we were on feasibility and equity still. But yeah, like I was saying, equity came out pretty high in the survey, and this was kind of first and foremost defined in the comments as being, serving traditionally underserved communities within Buncombe County. But some kind of details around that included, proximity to low income and senior housing, engaging the public in that project design and implementation, like we were talking about earlier. The kind of cultural and historical significance of a project to its community, and also considering and mitigating against potential negative impacts. So things like increased traffic of people coming to these parks, potential like gentrification once these parks are brought into a community, even things like sound and light pollution from these parks. And then the kind of final consideration within equity was that they want to see geographic distribution of these lands. They don't want all of the parks and passive recreation lands to be in one part of the county. They'd like to see them kind of spread out so that everyone within our county can access and use them. Next, we had management and maintenance and cost and leveraging of funds, each at 10%. So in management and maintenance, this again is getting around kind of what's the long-term plan for this space. And that can include things like invasive species management, trash and litter management. There's a lot of concern around like wanting to see maintenance of trails for erosion control. Again, engaging the community in park maintenance. There are some great comments around like volunteer engagement and kind of like association engagement in how we manage these lands in the long term, and making sure we have experienced land managers involved in these projects. I think for our conversation, a lot of these elements might be more applicable to kind of the improved lands than the land acquisition. But again, even for the land acquisition, getting back to the conversation with Fru, like who's responsible for maintaining that land in the meantime before it's turned into a park is still an important question. For cost and leveraging of funds, we want to make sure that they are being efficient in how they are budgeting the cost for these projects, especially if they're the ones that include improvements and designs within them. making sure that those cost estimates are up to date, that they have contingencies for different elements of the design. Are they bringing in other sources of funding to the project, and kind of leveraging the bond sources to make sure this money goes as far as possible? If they do get bond funds, will the project be fully funded? We don't want to make sure that if we're allocating bond funds for a project, it's going to happen. It's not going to get sidetracked because they're still missing a significant chunk of funding. And then, the considerations for the long-term maintenance and management costs of the land. The last two are alignment with county plans and safety. So alignment with county plans, this was one that actually was weighted a bit higher in the greenways criteria than this one, but in the public engagement, this one, people did not care quite so much about alignment with county plans, but this would be things like the alignment with the comprehensive plan, our Parks and Rec master plan, or other strategies. If there's alignment with municipal or regional plans, that might be applicable. Contribution to things like wildlife conservation strategies, or and then finally flexibility to allow for us to recognize new needs and priorities as they come up. And then finally, for safety, this came up in the survey a lot. Again, things like mitigating potential conflict between different types of users of these lands, like bikers and hikers, considerations for crime prevention, so things like safety patrols, lighting, so that may or may not fit in the definition of passive recreation, but that did come up. Clear signage for trails and other features, education around wildlife encounters and safety around how to engage with wildlife and what to do if you come across a bear or a snake or something. One that I found was interesting was like areas for shade and rest. People want to make sure you're not getting overheated while using these lands. And then availability or easy navigation, and like making sure people don't get lost on these lands and these trails was another safety concern that came up in the survey a lot. So things like maps, or again, the signage could be one contribution to navigation. So that's the criteria, including the weights and kind of some of the elements that we considered within those, how it's currently been refined and drafted. That can definitely move some weights around based on this subcommittee's thoughts. We can add things to what's included, add other elements. So yeah, I'm very curious to hear thoughts and feedback on the criteria. Bob, I see you have a hand raised on the. You're muted, Bob.
Thank you for that. So I have a quick question related to costs. Maybe Parks and Rec can answer this. I heard some number of years back that it costs like $1 million for 1 mile of trail to build a hiking trail. That sounded crazy to me, but do we have any idea what costs are really to build out a trail? That'll impact the budget in a big way. And things like a bathroom, if you got to put a septic system in and water and all that. Do we have any idea what something like that would cost? Just rough numbers. Is it $1 million for a mile of trail, or what? Do we have any idea?
No. We're probably looking at $10 a linear foot for a hiking trail that's hand built.
So 5,000 foot would be a mile, right? So 50 grand for a mile of trail?
Probably around that for a hiking trail. That wouldn't be a multi-use, or that's probably 2 to 3 feet wide, bench cut, hand tools, that kind of thing. It'd probably go up with machine. From my work as a landscape architect, we've got rough numbers that I'm happy to share with the group as far as a septic system and decent soils might be $3,000 to $5,000, depending on what type of bathroom facilities you might use. I've worked with the Forest Service and those CXT pit toilet type bathrooms can be 75 to 100,000 fully installed with the vaults that have the where they store the solids. But maybe the county's got numbers that they use and we could lean on them to give us information on other things that maybe I can't provide, or if I'm not on the committee in a few years that couldn't be easily accessible.
Yeah, we have numbers. I mean, the trail number we often use is $15 a linear foot in the mountain region. And then as far as greenway, you might have been talking about greenways, Bob, and that's actually the current going price on greenways in this region is $3.5 million per mile. So.
Okay, so just rough numbers then. A mile is 5,000 linear feet roughly, right? So that'd be about like at $15 a foot, it's 75,000 for a mile. So if you got 2 miles, it's 150 grand. Rough numbers, roughly speaking.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Interesting.
Other thoughts, feedback on criteria, including the weights of these?
I think this would be common sense, but if a trail was being considered to be put through some place, and it was not known, or it was trying to be decided whether it's hiking or biking, and everybody or whatever, as an ecologist, I would want to see that a survey is done first to see what's there. And then if there happens to be special stuff there, then it should have a lower accessibility or designation for some users as opposed to light trail users, so to speak.
So
That's not hard to do. Actually, the city made me, when they built Richmond Hill Park, and they moved the disc golf course that was user created. They moved that to a different spot. They required them to have me walk through their course and make sure they weren't going to be harming any rare plant species. And they did the same thing with the bike trail they put in there. And that worked fine. There was no overlap with anything harmful.
that might be a requirement for those projects that like design element. Are you thinking like a land survey would be something you would, I mean, for land acquisition,
You would probably have that information by that time,
Right.
but just want to note it, that's all.
Yeah.
That make your decision of how the trail is going to be used once you know what the ecosystem is there.
And,
Matt knows all about that kind of stuff too.
and if an easement was being put on the land, then there would be an environmental assessment for sure.
And when you're doing trails, part of design is there's an environmental component to that as well. Depending on what you're doing,
Okay, well, for the criteria, kind of the next step and phase would be, as we've discussed in the process, like this subcommittee would then need to vote to adopt criteria once it's finalized. And then it would go before the commissioners. I think based on the conversation today, it sounds like we might want to have a clearer picture of this track conversation and how that relates to the criteria. So I can build that out and have that with the finalized criteria when we're ready for adoption. I did want to bring up for that adoption phase, obviously the next meeting is in September and it's the third week of September. So if we were to wait till that meeting to review the final criteria and adopt it, that means we would go to the commissioner in October at the earliest. Or if, and you don't have to make a decision now, but if the subcommittee wanted to potentially do a special meeting earlier than the third week of September, we could do that as well to speed up the timeline. So just wanted to put that out there around process and next steps. And I know we also don't have the chair today. He does not have to be present to vote because we have a quorum, but I did just want to put that out there and hear what thoughts were on that process. If you guys would rather wait till September or potentially do a special meeting before, I think it's September 19th is the next meeting.
My thought is, first of all, you've been given so many different things, but if you're capable of consolidating something into a sort of criteria proposal or whatever, I'm available to meet earlier to at least pre-review those or whatever.
Would somebody like to make a motion to see if we would reschedule next month's meeting to an earlier date and propose a date?
Is there an expectation from the county commissioners as to when they hope to get proposed criteria?
We haven't given them a set date. We said we wanted to bring the criteria to them, ideally either September or October. So if I don't think we're in a rush. It's just obviously the sooner we have the criteria adopted and approved, the sooner we can move forward with the RFP process and opening the application window. But the commissioners are just expecting it in the early fall time period. We don't have a set meeting date that we were planning to go.
Well, I was just thinking that considering that people voted on this back in last November, that it would behoove us, I think, to move as quickly as we can to get this going, so that they'll see that it was that we're making progress on what they voted on.
I agree.
And because it's going to take you all a while to put together the application process, forms and get this out to people. So that's sort of another step that's going to be there before we can start taking applications.
So then I guess to Matt's point, if you guys do want to motion to schedule the September meeting to earlier in the month, someone is more than welcome to make that motion. If you guys do vote for that, I can follow up after this meeting to nail down a specific time that works for everybody.
But I would ask you, if you were to come up with your idea for a deadline for a next meeting, early meeting, what would be your proposed? Because you're the one that's doing all the work.
I have the capacity that I can definitely get this final criteria to you guys in that week of September 4th, which September 4th is Labor Day, so
yeah,
you don't want to use that day, but
right.
The week of September 5th through 8th, I would definitely be able to have that package proposal to you guys during that.
So if there was a motion to change it, it'd probably be the earliest would be the week of the 11th.
Okay.
Move it up a week to the 12th, in other words?
Yeah.
Tuesday the 12th?
That will work for me.
Does somebody want to make a motion to move next month's meeting to the 12th?
Before we do that, can I just, what's going to change between now and then? Because I thought we agreed, everybody kind of said you don't need two separate applications or two separate criteria. So I'm not sure what's the special, what are we doing in this special meeting that's different than what we're doing today?
I think we'd be approving the final criteria.
But did we get any feedback for any changes?
Good point.
So there wasn't a ton of feedback today. I was going to say that between now and like the end of the month, if you guys had feedback, you could reach out to me to offer that. But if there isn't feedback and there's no requested changes on the criteria, to Jennifer's point, you don't necessarily have to make a final package version. You can vote on what's available now. But I wanted to give you guys the chance if you did have additional feedback.
So we have a quorum.
You do have a quorum.
I guess it's just a matter of if you have this stuff written down and we can see it, that would be a good thing to see that, have that familiarity.
Bob, I have a question. Is it partly, I just want to point out, for those of you that are online, you saw whatever was just presented. Those of us in the room did not.
Oh,
So
I am so sorry. I did not.
So they did not see what it was that you were presenting. It's right there. We're seeing that black box.
I thought you knew that.
Oh my gosh, I think the back of my mind might
And
have
that's
that,
why-
but my
that's why
front of
people
my
came
brain
in.
did not.
Yeah, that's why people came in trying to adjust, but
Thank you, Alice. My brain did not make that connection. I sincerely apologize that you guys did
So
not see the
how
criteria.
was what they saw today different than what we saw last time?
Yeah, okay, I wish I could. I can.
The only comment I would make on the criteria currently would be that it seems to me that long-term management and maintenance might deserve a little bit higher percentage. Maybe it's not the 15, maybe it's not the 10, maybe it's 12, 12 and a half, because I think long-term, that is going to be one of our biggest challenges.
Okay, so if, quick pause, so I'm gonna share the presentation with Catalina so that hopefully she can get it up and you guys can see the written criteria. I sincerely apologize about that. To your point around increasing the percentage for long-term management and maintenance, is there a place where you would propose reducing a percentage of another criteria? Because we would obviously have to, in order to increase the percentage on one criteria, we'd have to decrease the percentage on one or more other criteria.
Can you share that screen again there?
Yep, one moment, just sending this to Catalina. So Zoom can see the criteria. You guys cannot, the Catalina's working.
Well, be able to use it.
Okay.
No. Excel that message on the top.
Well, you could just send it to us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that also works.
That's what I was
Yeah,
thinking.
just send it to us and then,
If we see anything,
I'm going to send it to the whole group, so those of you online will also receive this presentation.
Well, my calendar's flexible. I mean, if you have enough time to get it done, Jill, in 2 weeks and get something out to us, this updates, to push it just a week ahead to change the schedule doesn't really save that much time. I don't know if it's necessary or worthwhile to go to like the 12th or, even the 5th might make sense. That pushes it 2 weeks ahead. Or the 29th, if you could be ready by then and we all have time on trying to keep it on a Tuesday, if that's what we want to do, the 29th or the 5th might be.
you need enough time. I think that it couldn't be before the 5th, I would think.
Yeah, I think the 5th would probably be the earliest, but I could definitely do the 5th.
You could do it.
I could do the 5th.
So if we get it before then and then we had a meeting on the 5th, it would push it ahead 2 weeks,
Yeah.
which might
No,
make
that's
sense.
More sensible.
I'm available on the 5th, y'all are. Is everybody,
I am.
Matt, are you good with that?
5th is going to be tough for me. But if the rest of the group would like to, I think that's not a reason not to.
Does it have to be on a Tuesday? Would later in the week work for you, like the Friday, the 8th, something like that? Give us a little more time, but
Yeah, sometime later in the week would probably work. I'll be getting back into town that day, so from vacation, so that's why I couldn't make it on the 5th. But
About Thursday the 7th. Is that a good day for everybody?
That works better for me.
yeah, that works for me.
Works for me.
make a motion to do the meeting on the 7th at noon for September's meeting.
Yep. Make the motion or second, whatever you just said.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We've got next meeting is September the 7th at noon.
Perfect. I will send out that updated calendar invite. And I will also share this presentation that I shared today. I, again, apologize that I did not process that. And then, yes, we will, as I mentioned, if you have feedback on the criteria or on the weighting of the criteria between now and then, please just reach out to me and I can revise things accordingly. I've noted the comment on the long-term management and maintenance weighting. So if there are thoughts on where those points might be able to be taken from, please share those thoughts as well. I know we are way over time, so I will briefly ask if there's anyone online for public comment. There's no one online for public comment. So unless there are any other items, we can ask for a motion to adjourn.
I don't have anything. Anybody else?
Nope.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Adjourned.